Connor, and you are watching Love Stories. And I wanted to continue with a previous theme of rest, rest for my soul. And I wanted to begin with a passage in Isaiah 30, actually, verse 15. I think it's a pretty familiar passage. It says, "This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, says. In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength, but you would have none of it." It's a very indicting passage, for Israel, of course, but even for us in this day, and certainly for myself. I grew up in, kind of a workaholic family. My mom and dad were always doing something. My father owned a flower shop for most of my growing up years. And it was his flower shop. Originally, it was on the corner of Hollywood and Vermont in Los Angeles, and it was called Dave's Flowerland. And, he was very proud he owned it. And it was a big deal for my father, son of immigrants, and my mom also, the son of immigrants, Russian Jews. So my dad worked and worked and worked at that place. He got up early in the morning, like 2 or 3 in the morning, to go down to the wholesale flower market and buy, get the best possible deals from all the growers there. He had connections with certain people. Some people liked him, some people couldn't stand him, My dad had a nickname around the market, the wholesale market, called Hollywood Dave. That's what they called him. And, when I got older, I went down a few times with my father, and, it was a very interesting, little situation with my dad. The market was quite interesting. It's completely blackout. There's, it's night. And here's all these lights on, all these flowers, all this, cigarette smoke going on, all these people, and dickering over the prices and all of this kind of thing. And my dad, with his coffee and his, his whole cigarette and, everything, And, some lady would come in selling her homemade tamales. They were awesome. They were awesome. They were the first tamales I ever tasted. They were the most amazing. And then later on, after he'd gotten his great deal, we would either stop in this really terrible little coffee shop, right where all the growers went, filled with smoke and grease and you name it. And my dad would have, non-kosher food, because he couldn't do that at home or in front of his sister, So, it was quite the adventure at the time. And my dad would drive, we'd drive back to the flower shop in Hollywood. My dad would unload all the stuff. Everybody would unload all the stuff, and then I would start to clean roses, and people would do various tasks. And my dad would be there maybe till 6 in the evening or something. Maybe somebody else would close up. Sometimes my dad would close up. You're talking about 2 in the morning to, 6 at night sometimes, or whatever it was, And my dad would do, that kind of thing 3 days a week, because the market days were Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then, the rest of the time, the other 3 days a week, he would work from opening to close kind of thing. That was my father. He really didn't delegate very well, but he had people who were helping him, but he had to have his hands on the business all the time, my dad, except my mom somehow got him to relinquish it on Sundays, which was a horrible day at home with my father. But for my mom, she would go in on Sundays and run the shop. But my dad was he was very consumed by the work. And, he would come home from work, and it really wasn't any greeting, might be, hi, hello, I would hug Dad because, he smelled like cigarettes and flowers. And then kind of kind of, I don't know, conflicting smells, okay? Carnations, I could smell carnations on my father. And then he would take a bath, long, hot, like burn his skin bath kind of thing. And then he would be in his paper or he'd watch the TV. He really had nothing to do with us because he was so consumed all the time with his work. And even on Sundays, my father had a hard time resting. He had to do something. He had to clean, we would weed the hill. We would take all the weeds off the backyard. My dad was big into that. Or, we'd do some kind of work, or he would take us fishing, which was really stressful, because no doubt my little brother and I would get our line into knots, and my father didn't have a lot of patience at all with us, so, unknotting it was not, a happy thing, and trying to catch fish and trying to enjoy it. I don't think my father knew very much about rest either. And my mom didn't either, And so that's where I came from, the flower shop. You worked, the shop was open 7 days a week. And, a big thing in America, I think, is 24/7, 24/7 fitness places, 24/7 this, 24/7 that. There was in Boston when I was going to college, Store 24. They were open 24 hours, Just the whole idea that, that continuous supply of whatever you need at any time of the day, you need it. I worked for a flower shop in New York at one point, in Manhattan, that was open 24/7, okay? I remember in my college days, I was in Boston, and I was going to Boston University as an acting major. And my second year, I had run out of scholarship money and managed to convince the administration to give me a kind of student loan, also a work study solely in my name, which was quite the feat. But I did manage because of my particular circumstances. So I proceeded to work almost 50 hours a week at a little submarine sandwich shop. So I would have my classes from like 8 or 9 in the morning until about 4:30, maybe 4 or 4:30 or 5. And then I would go across the street to Babbo's, it was called, and I would work there from 5 to 1. And then I would ride my bike. I was using my bike because, public transportation wasn't running 24/7 in Boston. And so I would ride my bike back to this little suburb place called Alston, where I was living in my apartment, me and several roommates that were uninvited, cockroaches. And so there was all the stress of that environment in my apartment because it was the first time I'd ever encountered cockroaches. So I had to deal with the cockroaches all the time. And sometimes they would be all over my apartment at night, except for my bed. So I get in my bed, and I'm not really want to walk around too much, all the things that contribute to the kind of stress that our bodies take in and our souls take in, I worked, like I said, almost 50 hours a week, including Saturday. And until I had a little problem. I came into the shop one day and I almost passed out. Turned out I had mononucleosis, the kissing sickness or something. And I had to stop. And I think, I rolled the whole thing around in my head for a long time. Why did I feel I had to fight so hard, work so hard? What was I trying to prove? And to whom was I trying to prove it? And I was so driven to prove myself to myself and to whoever it was. Rest was not a concept I embraced or understood. On the one day I had off, I'd go grocery shopping, I'd clean up my apartment, I'd try to deal with my roommates that I didn't want. You know, I mean, it was on and on and on. It was relentless. My life was relentless. But I didn't feel it as much in my younger years as I begin to feel it now in these years. And, you know, I came very close to a nervous breakdown at that time in my life because I didn't understand my own motivation and I was trapped in it. And, you know, this is why this passage speaks to me so profoundly. In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength. But you would have none of it. And I think, you know, for us as believers, a lot of times this is true. We have none of it. Because we come into church, we come into the faith, we come into the body of believers, and it's like, well, you know, we need volunteers for this, and we need volunteers for this, and we need volunteers for this. And I see people around me volunteering their brains out, right? Because we're still on that work ethic, like, or we're still trying to prove ourselves to somebody else, to a whole set of other somebodies. And I'm not saying to be lazy, because this is not about laziness or idleness. This is not about that. This is about knowing when and where to say no, and to value what God values, which is ourselves. Sometimes we trash ourselves by saying yes to everybody because we don't know how to say no. Because like my father, you know, he needed to use every hour to get as much, you know, profit as he possibly could, because he was, you know, it's his store, it's his life, it's his livelihood. His family depends on us. And the weight of that responsibility could be very crushing. I think for a lot of years it was very hard on my father, you know. Nobody thought in the family very well of him, you know, like he was esteemed in some big way, like he was doing this great accomplishment. But the fact that my father owned his own shop, and that, you know, he had a clientele. He had quite, you know, had some quite, you know, very well-paying clientele. But that wasn't you know, my father was trying to prove himself to himself as well. He was trying to make sure we had enough money for everybody, you know. I mean, and we do that. We take the things that we grew up with often, and we apply them to our walk with the Lord. And the Lord has to speak to our hearts, deal with our hearts, and help us realize He loves us. He loves us. You know, there's a whole thing that goes on in the church body. It's like, well, He blessed you to be a blessing. No, I don't receive that. He blessed me. End of story. That I will be a blessing is a corollary thought. But it's not the reason He blessed me. He blessed me because He loves me. He loves you so you can love others. No. He loves me. Period. There's rest in that. There's rest in knowing that He loves me, period. I'm not required, okay? There are religions that require you, okay? My relationship with the Lord isn't built on what I'm going to do for Him because He loves me. My relationship with the Lord is built on what He did for me. And my receiving that, my being changed by that. Will I bless others? You know, probably. I mean, the more I know the Lord, probably. Okay? Will I love others as He has loved me? Well, probably. But it won't be the reason He loves me. He loves me. End of story. And that is so amazing in itself, right? because all the love we know in this world has a string attached, or many. I mean, it's so conditional. We don't really know how to love unconditionally, but he does, and he has loved us unconditionally. But we decide to put conditions on the love, which is crazy, but we don't know any better. This is what we do. So in the body of believers, we say, well, yeah, you know, because he blessed you, you should go out. And it's like, no, I don't should. I don't need to. Should is the wrong word. I don't have to. Okay? All I most need to do is to love him. And in this exchange, receiving his love so that love comes alive in me to love him, I will learn to love others. I will learn to love myself. I will actually maybe learn how to love my enemy because of the love that he has poured out in me and lavished me with. But it's not the reason he loves me, because I'm going to do all that. He loves me, standalone statement. And honestly, in that statement, there is rest. Because conditions are put on me all the time and on you all the time. Strings are attached to so many things that we exchange between each other as people. But you see, Jesus does this entirely differently. He loves us, period. And that's very freeing. That's very healing. I want to share a couple of scriptures with you, a few more. In Exodus, I want to go back to Exodus, actually Exodus 34. So God is speaking to Moses, and he says for the Israelites, he says in verse 21, 6 days you shall labor, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest. Okay, he says that there. And then in 35, he says it a few times in different ways, but I'm just going to read these two for starters. Again, in chapter 35, verse 2, let's go back to verse 1. Moses assembled the whole Israelite community and said to them, "These are the things the Lord has commanded you to do." And the very first thing he tells them is this: for 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day shall be your holy day, a day of Sabbath rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it is to be put to death. Do not light a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. Okay, now that's pretty heavy, you know, you're going to be put to death. I mean, obviously this has some serious weight and consideration to God, because it's the very first thing that Moses tells the assembled Israelite community when he's come down from being in the presence of the Lord. For 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day shall be your holy day, a day of Sabbath rest to the Lord. And what happens is rather interesting. We'll go on to Leviticus 25, fairly well-known passage. I'm just going to read the first part here, the verse. The first verse, the Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the seventh year, the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself. your male and female servants and the hired worker and temporary resident who live among you, as well as for your livestock and the wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten. Okay? So it's not to be sold. It's not for profit. It's not for livelihood. It's just simply to sustain them. Okay? But the land is to be rested in the 7th year. Okay? So this is what we find in Leviticus 25, the first few verses. But Israel didn't obey that. They didn't obey that command. They went into exile to Babylon. For the length of years, the land did not rest. For 70 Sabbath years, Israel was in exile in Babylon. Every 7th year was a Sabbath year. So if you figure it out, it's like 490 years of Sabbath. There were, 70 years of Sabbath in the 490 years, over the course of 490 years, that Israel did not rest the land. And then they were sent into exile, into Babylon, because they did not observe that command. I think we have a very difficult time believing that God will provide for us if we rest. I know I do. I know, like my father, when we began Improbable People Ministries, I never really thought about rest very much. We would do concerts and presentations for an offering. We still do, 30-something years later. So, I had no control over the offering. I felt like that was the right thing to do, that was something God wanted us to do, for an offering, without any fee or minimum, without even expenses paid actually most of the time, only certain exceptions. So in order to counterbalance the fact that I couldn't control what might show up in the offering, or how much our, sales of the CDs would be, or in that time, cassette tapes, I would book as many concerts as I possibly could. I would book as many concerts anywhere, everywhere, any place that said yes, I would book that concert. I would go through the yellow pages. I'm not kidding. I would do whatever it took to get as full a schedule as possible, because that was the only way I could reassure myself that probably that would be enough for us to live on. It wasn't a whole lot of faith in that. Of course, God was the one to open the door or close the door. But I wasn't really trusting him, to provide in the way that he wanted to provide. Okay? I didn't have that in me. I didn't have that ability to rest in that trust even about God, that he would provide, even in the spaces. And in this last, during this pandemic season, of course, I haven't done nearly as many concerts because I haven't been able to. And I've seen God provide in a way that I've never seen him provide really before. I've seen glimpses of it and more of it, but it doesn't make any logical sense to me how God would provide in this season unless I did enough concerts. And I certainly didn't do enough concerts during, the height of the pandemic. And now I'm thinking about the concerts and a presentation and everything very differently. I'm kind of learning how to wait on God. And I'm kind of taking it a little slower for a lot of reasons. Certainly because I'm a little older than I was when we started 30 years ago. But also because, I have some struggles left over from having the coronavirus in November and December. And they kind of require me, in a sense, to rest more, which has led to some thinking about the meaning of rest and my wrestling with God about what it means to rest. And my hope is I can come to a place where I can rest in his provision for us, not be lazy or idle. I don't know if I know how to be exactly lazy or idle, but to be able to accept when it's time to rest. I don't want to be like Israel that worked the land for 490 years and they paid the price for 70 years with 70 years in exile in Babylon. And I think we pay a price for not resting. We pay a price in the name of the Lord for working 24/7, 24/7, all the time, all the time, all the time. It's for God, right? But he designed us, body, soul, and spirit, to rest on the seventh day. He set it apart as a day holy to him. I really believe that, but I struggle with that. So learning how to rest on whatever day or in whatever time, I think there must be an art to it, and I think it must require grace and the Spirit of the Lord, especially among those of us who have grown up with the workaholic ethic, you know. And so it's something I'm asking God for, to show me how to enter into his rest, right? Because that's really important. How to enter into his rest, how to learn how to be quiet and still and connect with him again without an agenda, just to come to him as he invites us to. Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Rest for your soul. So now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. And may the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. This is Sally Klein O'Connor, and you've been watching Love Stories. Till next time.